Hello again. I wanted to make a short video detailing each step of my video creation process for anyone that's interested, because it's the kind of question that I get asked a lot, especially by supporters of the channel, so here you go. I think I have quite an efficient workflow by this point, and even though I don't edit all my videos anymore, the things I do also help save my editor some time, which is nice. So we'll start with how I record gameplay, because this is where the savings are really made. I use the timecode notes tool on a platform called editingtools.io, which of course I'll link below, to take my notes whilst recording. Normally I do this using a second keyboard plugged into my laptop so that I don't have to tab out of whatever I'm recording just to take a note. When I start recording, I'll also start the timer on this tool, which is set at 10:00:00:00 by default because of camera timecode standards or something, but OBS will start its timecode at 01:00:00, etc. So you have to adjust it either now or later in your editing software, and I choose to just do it here when I get started. Once it's running, you just take notes in there whenever something interesting happens in game. Like, for example, if somebody ripped a fat kickflip, I'll take a note to that effect. When you're done, you export those notes as whatever format you need. I edit in DaVinci Resolve, so I need a .edl file. But all the other formats are available here too. So we're done recording our gameplay and have a notes file that corresponds with each video file. I'm using an enshrouded video I recorded recently as an example. I think Resolve is the program that best supports my workflow, but it does also work in Premiere Pro. That's what my editor uses. It's just a bit more clunky, but with some googling about importing markers from an XML file, you can figure it out, I'm sure. Anyway, I've got this fresh project here and I want to set up a bin for my gameplay to live in. Now I make an individual timeline for each recording session and open them all up along my timeline by hitting Display Stacked Timelines in here. Then up in my bin here I can right click them one by one and go Timelines, Import, Markers from EDL, and then select the appropriate file and there you go, markers imported. At this point, after importing all the markers to my gameplay, I'll start to write the video's script, which I do in Notion. I've already written this video's script, but to demonstrate I'll write a short section here. See, I've made a note here that says something about updrafts, so I'll write my little section of the script about how updrafts help you to get around the new biome, etc, etc. And then I have a note about how I found the ancient spire here, so I'll say something like, I used the updrafts to fly to the local ancient spire, inside which are a pair of trap rooms, etc, etc. You get the point. I go through all of my footage writing the video's script based on these notes. And at this point I'm not actually cutting any of the gameplay. I actually never cut any of the gameplay. Once I have the whole script written, I'll record my voiceover, which perhaps confusingly I still use Adobe Audition for, despite the Fairlight page of Resolve having pretty much all the tools I'll need to do it. Don't worry about it, it's just how it is. Once I've recorded the voiceover, I'll apply a preset that I've been using for a very long time now. That doesn't do anything crazy, it's just a basic EQ that slightly lowers off the bass because I have a low and boomy voice that can be a bit too much if left alone, and it adds a little bit in the mids. Wee-wah woo-woo. Wee-wah woo-woo. Hello again. I'm recording a video about a video. I'm pretending to record a video. Wee-wah woo-woo. I think it sounds better. I mean, I don't know, it's kind of personal preference. I also have two elements of the RX10 plugin pack in here. A denoiser, which helps get rid of any hiss or background PC fan noise. I may or may not need this nowadays, but I definitely did back in the day when my PC was much noisier. And then there's a declicker, because I have a very wet mouth. And it makes a lot of gross noises. This can help to reduce them. Luckily for you, you can also set it to just output exclusively the removed noises, so you can listen to all of those little wet noises. Anyway, moving on. Once the video is recorded, I export it and head back over to Resolve, where we'll now make a main timeline to edit on. This is where things are going to get messy. I usually edit across two monitors for extra space, but to record this I'll just be on one, so it's usually a lot less cramped than this, but it's time to activate the second timeline. Onto the main timeline goes the voiceover, down on track 4, which I always set to orange. I go over to the Fairlight panel, the one that I should probably also be using to record the video in the first place, and apply some dynamics to the track. An expander to cut down lower volume sounds like breaths and mouth sounds, and a compressor to bring down the higher volume sounds, so that the overall profile of the voiceover is more even.
With a new mountainous biome,
Good stuff.
new enemies and wildlife.
The VO is raw and has mistakes and multiple takes in it, so it needs cutting up, which I'll do for a little section here just for demonstration. With voiceover prepared, this is where the dual timeline thing comes into use. We'll skip over the intro because in this case it's a sponsor disclosure which I don't really want to re-edit for this video, and into the part where I actually start telling the story of the gameplay, using the markers to guide me to the relevant parts of the recording in the upper timeline, slicing it out and placing it directly onto my main timeline. Then I'll do any minor stuff like zooms and pans to match whatever point I'm trying to make. Often I'll go and record extra gameplay. Like here I say I played a melee character back when the game launched, so I went and got a little extra footage of a fresh character bonking some stuff to slot in here. I usually apply any clip transitions and effects as I go here, so since this bonking clip lives outside the story I'm telling, I'll do a little glitchy transition, and since I'm talking about the past, I'll go ahead and make the footage look a bit old-timey and sepia, and maybe if I'm feeling really saucy, I'll add some analog damage or something. I'll also pop some glitchy noises on those transitions. I just have a library of these kinds of noises by this point, but to add variance, I'll tweak the speed of them and usually use the same sound effect that I used to transition into a scene, but in reverse when I transition back out, to give the effect that we're now going back to where we were before. That's kind of slightly creeping into the territory of artistic wankery, but I don't know, it works. And since I said the word bonk, I legally have to use that sound effect, and for repetitive sound effects like that, I'll vary the volume of the effect slightly just to add a little bit of variance there too. After that brief sojourn to the slightly more complex editing, it's back to just placing gameplay over voiceover. I like to do the whole job in a linear fashion like this to vary the workload, rather than doing every job in the editing process to completion one by one. Hopefully that's enough of a demonstration of how my notes help to get gameplay onto a timeline very quickly, and without ever having to actually cut down the entire raw gameplay files. Now I'll drop some background music under this and we'll balance the audio a bit. I have a fairly messy, but also quite extensive bin of music set up in Resolve, organised by either game for soundtracks or loosely by genre for tracks from the two music platforms I use, which are Artlist and Epidemic Sound. Epidemic is what most creators use and it's great, but there's a few tracks that I like to use, keeping me subscribed to Artlist. Early on in a video I like to use upbeat tracks. We're just getting started, it's exciting and new, that kind of vibe, you know? And then as the video progresses to more narrative storytelling, I'll transition into tracks that suit the situation better. And the music track is always pink, by the way. This track fits very well, I think, but the intro isn't quite long enough, so I have to hide a sneaky little loop in there. It's hidden under both voiceover and game sounds, so it's easy enough to do this kind of thing, to make a track fit exactly how you want it, which in this case is so that it swells up when I introduce the new mountainous biome.
So anyway, emerging out into the rather
Another thing I do pretty often is to suddenly cut music to emphasize a point, like being one shot by this thing here.
Rather hard.
Then I'll either fade the same track back in afterwards or use that as a handy moment to swap to a different track without a jarring change of background music. I balance my tracks fairly simply, keeping my voiceover as is and then having gameplay and music down usually about -25 to 30, but yeah, you just do it by ear. There's no one number fits all, you just kind of have to hear what sounds good. And ideally you'd listen through multiple things, like I have speakers and headphones in my office so that I can see whether or not something's too loud through headphones but inaudible on speakers. That happens a lot. And that's pretty much the entire process of making a Hazzor video. Once I get to the end, I'll render it out and watch the whole thing, looking for sections that could use a little bit of extra polish or any areas where I've missed an opportunity for an interesting edit. But it wouldn't be a video about making YouTube videos without a section on thumbnails. They're pretty important, so I'm going to talk about how I approach them using two examples. This lovely image here for a RimWorld video about vomiting rats sure did get people clicking. In its first few hours, 15% of people that this video was shown to clicked on it, which is a very good number for my channel. There are a number of factors that play into this of course, but the thumbnail is a pretty big one. This thumbnail went through a lot of changes. You can see here I was originally using a character with a furry rat face, but in the end decided that a human face would be more striking. My philosophy for thumbnails generally is basically to try and have a bright central focus with some relevant and eye-catching surroundings. So here we have our character vomiting a shitload of rats, which is fairly striking, surrounded by a load more rats just to add some visual interest rather than simply having them in front of a less interesting background. This large, bold text behind the character thing has kind of become a bit of a signature, not just of my channel but of a lot of similar channels, so it often feels important to add it so that my regular audience has something they can very quickly see and think, oh, that's a Hazzor video, I should click on it. So that's RimWorld, which I find very easy to make thumbnails for because the art style is simple to make stand out with its bright colours and thick outlines. But what about Fallout? I find this much more challenging. Here's the likely thumbnail for my upcoming Fallout London video. Whilst editing the video, my very helpful editor Pagga sent me this screenshot because it had good thumbnail vibes, and he also put together a basic mock-up of a thumbnail concept which looked like this. It's a good concept, so I recreated it with a little bit more pizzazz. Firstly, I massively blow out the character's brightness and saturation because this is a YouTube thumbnail, and everybody does that, so you have to do it too or your image will look dull by comparison. It's the saturation that really does it. Without it, he's pretty much in black and white. I also use the dodge tool to highlight certain areas like his face. If I, for example, wanted the foregrip or barrel of this gun to pop out a bit more, just jam on it with the dodge tool. Really go to town on it. Dodge on that thing. Okay, not that much, but you get the point. The Union Jack background obviously works here because it's Fallout London and it adds some nice eye-catching colours to the background. However, I do almost always blur the backgrounds of my thumbnails just to soften out any hard lines that might otherwise distract from the focal subject. I recreated the Fallout style text down at the bottom like Pagga did. It's usually very easy to find what fonts games use in their UI with a quick Google search, and this lets you include something that looks like a UI element without having to actually screenshot something in-game that might be really crusty and low resolution. The reason to include this is to signal to people that it's a Fallout video, without straight up just putting a Fallout logo on the image. Plenty of people will look at the character and recognise this already, but the green text in square brackets will really push the point home. And then there's my massive bold text across the top, which I did in 2 parts so I could have it behind his head and in front of his gun just for some interest, basically. The fairly obvious thing that I suspect most people don't do enough when making a thumbnail is to zoom the fuck out. Remember that it's a thumbnail. Open a YouTube video and look at your thumbnail alongside it. On this screen I'm immediately drawn to Donkey's Mario Maker thumb because it's just insanely bright. Same goes for the Monster Factory video below it for similar reasons, high contrast bright colours. But overall, I think that this Fallout London thumb does a pretty good job. I don't find that when I look at my screen here as a whole, it's comparatively dull and hiding in the background. So there you go, that's just about everything that I think I can offer when it comes to how I make YouTube videos. I'd talk about how I come up with concepts in the first place, but I actually don't think I'm very good at it, and rely mostly on sudden inspiration, rather than being able to just sit there and shit out a list of good ideas like some people can. So, thanks for watching this, I hope you enjoyed it or found it helpful, but especially thank you for supporting me directly. I don't have to ask you to like this video or anything, which is an unusual feeling, but anyway, remain indoors, because ultimately the best way to get good at this stuff is just to do it a whole lot, and you're not going to be able to see your screen properly if you're outdoors. If you have any other ideas for members or Patreon content, then go ahead and let me know either here or in the Discord, but until next time, goodbye.